Hello and welcome to this video. Well, you've seen the title of this one, so it's pretty contentious. As are many of my videos this month, I've been messing around with some serious videos, but also some contentious videos. And this one's pretty contentious, isn't it? So I'm making the claim that what is described on Wikipedia as the greatest drum solo in history is actually boring rubbish. Now, I am going to tell a story, and by the end of this story, hopefully I'll have explored this idea and you will have enjoyed the story. So, if we went back 40 years, it's Christmas time, and I'm very excited because I've asked for Christmas to have, from my parents, a VHS copy of the film Song Remains the Same. I'm a huge Led Zeppelin fan, I'm a huge John Bonham fan, and I'm still a huge John Bonham fan. So I'll wait for Christmas Day to come. And on Christmas morning, I open my presents and I have The Song Remains the Same. And for the first time in my life, I actually see Led Zeppelin. Now, the first album I ever bought by Led Zeppelin was Led Zeppelin 2. And Led Zeppelin 2 had the brilliantly titled Moby Dick. What an incredible title for a heavy track. It's like the best title you could ever have. And when Moby Dick opened up, it was the best riff I'd ever heard in my life. And then what followed was a drum solo by John Bonham. Well, I have to admit, it didn't impress me very much. And I will come back to why it didn't impress me. But with the live video of Song Remains the Same, I thought, this time, looking at the track sheet on it, Moby Dick, and it was so long, it was about 15 minutes longer as well, massively long, and I thought, this is it, Bonham's going to be doing the drum solo live, it's going to be amazing. And so I sat there and put the video on it, and it was mind-blowing. You know, we saw Peter Grant turn up and he shot someone and their head fell off and loads of coloured blood shot up all over the place. Jimmy Page was crawling around, you know, like a hermit, climbing up this big statue thing that's in the middle of Led Zepp 4. Robert Plant was gallivanting around eating mushrooms and, you know, riding out of the sea on a horse with a, you know, sword in his hand. Or was it the horse that had a sword in his hand? I can't remember. Anyway, it was incredible. And then they kicked into Moby Dick. It was amazing. And then the drum solo started up. And I sat there, and I wanted it to be the best drum solo in the world because I love John Bonham, but I have to be honest, after a while, it was going on for a bit. And just when it had got pretty boring, I thought, he then went on to the timpani and he started to randomly bang the timpani with pressing the pedal up and down, so it was going boing, 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 over and over again. And I don't know, I wasn't very impressed. Now, I was a drummer and I've been playing the drums for 4 or 5 years at this point, and I knew what I was doing. I'd heard lots of drum solos. This one didn't impress me very much, but no problem. I kept watching, and then we got into a whole lot of love. And before we knew it, you know, Robert Plant was telling me all about his kids, whilst Jimmy Page did the whole thing with his hand on the old theremin. All that had happened. So that was all very exciting, I thought, you know, and I loved it very much. But the drum solo was always a fast forward moment for me. My favourite bit of the whole Moby Dick bit is actually the drum fills he does before he goes to the solos. Those are really good. Also, another highlight is when Robert Plant says Moby Dick, because he goes, John Henry Bonham, Moby Dick, 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 Dick. And that is always what I hear. I can never hear the words Moby Dick. I always hear Moby Dick, Dick, Dick. Those of you who watch the film will know I have accurately embodied, and I have also abridged the whole film down in just a few sentences, which proves I know this film inside out. Now, many years later, my love of Led Zeppelin and John Bonham, as is the strange actions of fate, meant that I ended up, and I've never mentioned this on the channel before, but I ended up as being Robert Plant's drummer in around about 1997. And I stayed Robert Plant's drummer for about 3 years, till around about 2000. It was a very incredible experience. At one point, I was even loaned for a short while one of John Bonham's drum kits, and I changed the head on that drum kit, and I took the old heads off and I stuck them in my garage. Now, recently, I was looking through those drum heads. I've actually brought one out here. I'll show you it. This is one of the drum heads I took off John Bonham's drum kit. And that looks suspiciously like a 1960s logo. I might be wrong. This has definitely been on John Bonham's drum kit. This drum head has. But it may well have been played by him. It's definitely been played by Robert Plant. Anyway, so I feel I'm in a pretty good position to have a conversation about this. In 2000, I stopped playing with Robert Plant, but I had a phone call from Dave Lewis, who runs a fanzine called Tight But Loose, and he's a writer on Led Zeppelin. And we got together to discuss the oncoming release of the film Led Zeppelin DVD. And on there was another version of Moby Dick, which it seems in the last 25 years has now become the platonic version of Moby Dick. I think this is quite surprising. But I think the reason for that is because the other two versions were a bit rubbish. And the one on the Royal Festival Hall performance from 1970 is a little bit better, right? So what I'm going to do on this as a drummer, I'm going to talk through this drum solo. I'm going to critique it, then I'm going to place it in the pantheon of drum solos and see where I think it should go. I definitely don't think it should be seen as the greatest drum solo in the world, as it says on Wikipedia. I don't think that's right. Now, before we launch into this iconoclastic discussion, let's have a look at the drum solo. I can only play you a little bit. In fact, I can't play you any of it because of copyright, and I don't want to get the copyright done. So what I thought I would do is I'm going to try and replicate the drum solo for you. So what you're about to see will be a short snippet of John Bonham playing, but you won't hear anything. What I've done is I've taken a recording of some boulders falling down the hillside, and I've recorded those at great expense and danger to myself. And I'm going to overdub that. I'm not taking the mickey in any way. It's just I don't want, YouTube will hear the drum solo, and before you know it, it'll all be, like Led Zeppelin or like they rip everybody off, and then by the same token, if you rip them off, they'll have you like this and all that bit. So, that was me. I know it's very dark. That was me, Led Zeppelin. I'm imagining, and they've got my arm behind their back, right? So this is what that will do. This is my replication of me watching that drum solo, being very bored. This is basically the experience, isn't it? Right, so let's have a look at this. Well, we're not going to have a look at it because I'm not going to. I'll tell you about it. The Royal Albert Hall. Did I say Royal Festival Hall earlier? If I do, I do apologise. It's the Royal Albert Hall performance from 1970. So it starts off. They do the riffs. He does the fills. The fills by this time are mirroring what Jimmy Page is doing on the guitar. They sort of. Jimmy Page does these sort of blues licks, and they follow it. Now, in terms of the sort of overall vibe, there's a track by Bobby Parker that came out in 1961, and I can't remember what it's called, but it's a very similar type of sound. So this is really a soul track, and it goes through a 1-4-5 chord progression. Those fills are wonderful, and then it stops, and at this point, the rest of the band walk off. Now, this is a very strange phenomenon, and I don't think we understand it very more. But in the classic period of rock and roll, when you had bands like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and Cream and Deep Purple, for some reason, people expected a drum solo. And people would deliver. Now, Moby Dick is not the first time this had happened. This goes right back in history, I would say, to Gene Krupa. Now, Gene Krupa was the drummer with the Benny Goodman band, and he was a very capable drummer. But the thing with Gene Krupa was he was also very animated in the way he played, plus he had film star looks. So by the time of the mid-30s, Gene Krupa had not only become a famous drummer, but he'd almost become like the first pop star. Now, back in the 1930s, people played all sorts of different drum kit setups with all sorts of different contraptions all over it. And actually, back then, people would have called the drum kit a trap set after the name contraptions. You never thought it was going to have this much information in, did you? But it will do. So let's keep going. But Gene Krupa played a much more established drum kit with a tom up on the front and a tom down below. And that became the standard way you set up a drum kit. Gene Krupa's importance in the history, not only of drumming, but in the development of the pop star in 20th century popular music, is undeniable. And so famous was he that in 1955, I believe, or could have been 56, they released a film called The Gene Krupa Story. Now, at this point in time, John Bonham would have gone to see this film. Now, we are not aware of what his influences are, or we have a very small idea because of the fact that he didn't do any interviews. Then he died in 1980 at the age of 32. But I haven't been able to speak to people who knew him very well, and I've been able to glean a number of influences out of it, of John Bonham. And the big band drummers were very influential on him, not only Gene Krupa, but also people like Louis Bellson, Buddy Rich, and British drummers like Jack Parnell. So he'd come out of that school of this sort of showy off Buddy Rich style drumming. Now, one of the things that's interesting in Bonham is his drum sound is copied almost directly from Buddy Rich. He's got a lot of the same gear and he tunes it in a very similar way. And a lot of the licks he's playing are taken from that sort of big band style approach. Now, John Bonham is famous for playing what we all call John Bonham triplets. And that basically goes left hand, right hand, bass drum. Now, most drummers like myself, because we're right-handed, we would play right, left bass drum. But Bonham doesn't do it like that. He actually goes like this, bass, left, right. So he does it backwards, coming up the kit. And when he moves that around the kit, it creates an incredible sound. Now, as he is a left-handed drummer, now I didn't know this till this morning. I was studying this solo and I looked at this and I thought, this bloke's left-handed. I could see he was left-handed because my brain was trying to solve what I was hearing. And not only is he playing those triplets in a reversed way, but a lot of the time when he's playing, he's leading with his left hand. And his left hand is very strong. So when he plays around the kit, it creates this very thunderous sound. And that's his sound. And a lot of the time, he's working from a very simple template in that his feet are what we call paddling. So his feet are going right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, back and forth like this. Taka, chicka, 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 chicka. Now, this is really calm from the double bass drum kit players. Louis Bellson in the 1940s and 50s with the Duke Ellington band pioneered these sort of big band drum solos that Gene Krupa had made popular and Buddy Rich had taken to the nth degree of like insanity. And he would do it with two bass drums. He was a tap dancer as well as a drummer. And this double bass drum thing got taken on by a lot of the rock drummers that emerged in the 1960s, most famously Ginger Baker. So Ginger Baker would paddle on two bass drums. Now, if you go back to this time and you look at early footage of Led Zeppelin, there's a promo video of them doing Communication Breakdown. I'll put a little bit up of it here. He's playing a double bass drum kit. Now, I was informed by Robert Plant that they used to have a lot of fun during the sessions for Led Zepp 3 and Led Zepp 4 in stealing John Bonham's second bass drum and taking it away and chucking it into a hedge. And then he would angrily go off to try and find it and then recover it. Now, I think what we've had here is John Bonham, up until his time as Led Zeppelin, had had to buy his gear. Now, the drum kit that I played was apparently the last drum kit that he ever played that he had paid for. It was a very small Ludwig kit. Obviously, when he got endorsed, he could do what he wanted. I think he would have been playing double bass drums if he could have had the chance, because I think he was very influenced by that big span style of drumming, including people like Ginger Baker. So he wanted to play double bass drums, but the rest of the band, I think especially Robert, didn't want him to play them. And this is only me supposing, but I do remember when I was playing it with Robert, we were doing a gig up in Stoke or somewhere, and I'd snuck a double bass drum pedal onto the stage, and I was playing, and just sort of for a bit of fun, I started squirting a few double bass drum bits and bobs. And when we got to the end of the song, Robert actually, in the middle of the gig, in front of everybody, told me off and told me to take the pedal away, informing the audience that it was the work of the devil, which I think it may be the work of the devil. He might be right there. Anyway, so I think Bonham wanted to play like that. So when he comes to his drum solo, he's actually adapted what Ginger Baker did. So he's paddling with his feet, and then he's basically playing these reverse flams around the kit in different combinations, and then a lot of sort of marching snare drum beats, and a lot of use of the paradiddle diddle. Now that would normally be right, left, right, left, left. But I wonder whether he's also going left, right, right, and playing those reverse and then moving those around the kit. And out of those licks, he basically creates this structure. Now, one of the things I think about this solo that I don't like is in terms of phrasing and in terms of vocabulary and in terms of rhythmical funkiness, playing in and around the beat. He's not doing that, but it's not really his fault, because the evolution of the big band drum solo that really came through Buddy Rich was this idea that it's just like a train and it just builds up and you build up to a big climax. Usually Buddy Rich would do something in the middle where he brought it back down, and he might feather the snare drum or play just around the cymbals, or he'd play underneath the hi-hat. And John Bonham replaces this by playing with his hands. Now, Bonham at this point at the Royal Albert Hall is playing a 26-inch bass drum. Now, when you play a 26-inch bass drum, that actually hoists your first tom up higher because it has to sit on top of that bass drum, although his was suspended in another snare drum cradle. Sorry about that. So so Bonham actually has his snare up very high. Now, when I used to teach drums, I used to say that a lot of drummers want to drop the snare drum very low and then they hunch over. But with Bonham, he's actually pushed back. He's got the snare drum up higher. And so when he goes to play with his hands, he's able to put a lot more power into the kit. I believe the reason why people perceived Bonham as being loud was not because he was hitting the drums harder, but because when he went to hit the drums, they were higher up. And so the stroke is naturally at that point, if you hit a snare drum, which is sort of opposite your belly button, when you hit that, the maximum street speed of the stroke is at the point of impact. And also his gripping, if you notice, he's not got this sort of grip. His fingers here are looser. And so what we've got is there's less grip here. So when he hits the snare, he lets those sticks come back. His technique is very, very good. And actually in this solo, there's some very interesting technical things. It opens up at the Royal Albert Hall with a quote from Max Roach's The Drum Also Waltzes. Now, this is a very important drum solo piece in that it utilizes an ostinato in 3. It goes bass, hi-hat, bass, hi-hat, bass, hi-hat. And then once you're holding that down, he then plays on the toms. Bum, 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 tick, tick, bum, tick, bum, tick, tick, bum, 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 and then he plays against that ostinato. Bill Bruford also covered this in the 1980s on one of the albums he did with Patrick Moraz for piano and drums. This then influenced drummers like Terry Bozzio, who utilised the ostinato in his playing and took it to another level. I myself became very interested in the ostinato. The thing with this is Bonham can't do it. So every time he goes to play, his feet stop. He cannot keep that ostinato going. He's trying to quote from it. So straight off, he goes into this idea and it doesn't quite mesh. Then he plays something very difficult on the drums where he does quite fast tapping with his right hand, which would be his weak hand. Da, 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 and then he plays triplets between his left hand intermittently and his foot. So he's going left foot, diddle, 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 and he holds those things down together. That, for me, is actually a very difficult thing to do on the drums. In terms of what the audience are hearing, it does sound quite confused. And then he takes these ideas and goes into some quite avant-garde areas where he's letting his hands sort of go in multiple directions at the same time. And then you get the sort of foot paddling, and you get this sort of military drum beat and these flam triplets moving around the kit, and they build up, then he drops it back down, then he goes to his hands. And there's certain points in that bit of the solo that are quite interesting from a sort of the African type of sound. He fiddles around with those, and then he goes to a set of congas that are to his left. He plays those quite skillfully as he plays those with his feet going at the same time. It's all very good. And then he drops into some great big John Bonham triplets, which he moves very fast around the kit, and that all builds up, and that's the drum solo. Now, this perhaps is his best version of it. I think the version of Moby Dick that's on the studio album is absolutely awful. John Bonham is well known for having this incredible drum sound, big and open, and yet on the 1969 studio recording, which is apparently edited together. So I think he was just messing around in the studio at the time, doing all sorts of solos. Jimmy Page recorded a load of it and then edited it down. I think that's what the idea was. But I think it's let down by the drum sound. And then the hand theatrics, of course, we are not aware of that. We can't see it. So all we hear is this sort of quite weak billion, billion, over and over again. I think it's hang on, my cat wants to get out now. Sorry, pussycat. What was that? She said this talk's got a bit too technical for her. She likes it when I just take the Nicky out of the Oasis, and she said, you're getting too technical, which is a fair criticism, I suppose. I've lost all the non-drummers, but let's keep going anyway. So it is not the technical aspects of this solo that I'm criticising. Bonham was a great technician. He had a flair, and he had a way of phrasing and playing that was absolutely unique, had a unique feel. And yet none of those things are utilised in the Moby Dick drum solo at all for me. I think this was a bit of theatrics. Everybody was doing it at the time. Cream did it with the track Toad. Black Sabbath had Rat Salad. Deep Purple had The Mule. And all of those drummers were doing a sort of adaptation of this sort of Buddy Rich big band drum solo. Now, from a musical and technical point of view of those drummers I just mentioned, I would say that Ian Pace's Mule solo was streets ahead of Bonham's Moby Dick solo. I would say that Bill Ward's solo is far more hysterical and all over the place, which I enjoy very much. And Ginger Baker did have the honour of, or accolade of, being the first to really do this in a rock band setting. But if you want to know who I think did the greatest drum solo of all time, it's going to be one of the jazz guys. It could be Billy Cobham, Terry Bozzio, Tony Williams, or a Buddy Rich. All of those drummers line up in terms of drum solos way in front of any of these rock drummers. But I think the classic rock drum solo, the stadium drum solo, is an art form all unto itself. And I've always felt the greatest example of this stadium rock drum solo ever performed by anybody is the solo performed by Brian Downey on Live with Thin Lizzy inside the track Bad Reputation. And when you hear that, he is doing all the bombastic stuff, he's doing all the build-up stuff, but it's so under control, and it's so beautifully played, and it's so beautifully executed, and it is just a wonderful piece of drumming. If you really want to hear it at its best, rather than listen to the version on Live and Dangerous, dig out the EP called Killers Live by Thin Lizzy. And I've been told, because I've mentioned this before, it's my favourite thing by Thin Lizzy. I mean, Live and Dangerous is incredible, but Killers Live is just so brutal in its sound. And Brian Downey's drum solo is absolutely incredible. So as we get to the end of this video, I can categorically say that the Moby Dick is not the greatest drum solo of all time. And there's probably around about 500 or 600 jazz drummers that have beaten Bonham to that accolade. When it comes to rock drum solos, I wouldn't even say that. If it comes to classic rock drum solos from the 1970s, I would give it to Brian Downey, but I would put Ian Pace I would put Tommy Aldrich was doing incredible solos at that time. There were so many drummers. Barrymore Barlow, my God. Even Bonham would have admitted that. You know, I think Barrymore Barlow was one of Bonham's favourite drummers and was nearly chosen to replace him after he sadly passed away. But the weirdest thing of all, and I've thought this since I was a kid, is not even Bonham's greatest drum solo. If Bonham's going to go down in history for doing an incredible solo, it's the solo which is called Bonzo's Montreux and appeared on Coda. And this is a solo of Bonham playing in Montreux recording studio. The drum sounds incredible, and it has one of his signature drum beats, and everything he does on that is Bonham at his best. There's some electrification of the drums that Jimmy Page did afterwards, which are absolutely wonderful. And I think that's the definition of a great drum solo, a drum solo that you'd want to hear over and over again. But in terms of Moby Dick, I think Led Zeppelin's reputation made this so legendary. And also, I have to say, their need perhaps for a bit of inspiration and refreshment halfway through the gig. Because I think there seemed to be an essential moment when they needed to go away and come back, if you know what I'm saying. I would like to do a sniff at the moment, but my nose is completely blocked because I've got a really bad cold. Do you want to see the Bonham's drum head again? What do you think? Come on. Do you think that's off Bonham's kit? What year is that? If that's 68, 69, right? If that logo's 68, 69, that is John Bonham's drum head and those pit marks. So he's hit that there. What do you think to that? Pretty impressive, eh? All right, thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to see more videos like this, then like and subscribe. If you want to become a patron, I've got a Patreon down below. You can do that if you want. Or you could pay into my PayPal tip jar. I've got something like that. I'm not very good at this today. I'm still suffering with this cold, making me a little bit stuttery. But so many of you agreed with me about the Moby Dick drum solo. I thought I'd put it out there, and I have now. And let's see what happens, whether this sort of flies as an idea. You know, you never know. People might turn, and I might be able to bring down its reputation. Why would you want to do that, Andy? I don't know. Probably because I think Bonzo's Montreux should be there. So when a kid discovers John Bonham and they know how amazing he is, and then, oh my God, he does a drum solo, let's go and check it out. And they put Bonzo's Montreux on, rather than having the thing that happened to me when I was 15 years old of going, well, come on, John, you're going to kick in a minute. Oh, where's the fast forward? I mean, fast forward was a big thing in 1984, whenever it came out, 85, 83, can't remember. Thanks for watching this video. I'll see you on the next one.